Can you hear me now? Okay. Sometimes I feel like I'm on one of those Verizon wireless commercials when I'm up here at church. Can you hear me now? Okay. Well, welcome if you're watching us online as well. This is being live streamed and recorded. Had several people to ask if we could do that, and want to welcome you, whether you're here in person or watching online or at a later date online. Today we are talking about planning ahead and getting our earthly affairs in order, getting ready for our earthly departure. That's something that we'll all inevitably face eventually. I don't think that's news to you, but it is something that we'll all face, and it's wise to prepare for that. A couple Bible verses I want to share as we start this morning. Psalm 90:12 says, "Teach us to realize the brevity of life, so that we may grow in wisdom." And this speaks just to how we live while we're here on earth. We only have a limited amount of time, and we should be wise stewards, not only financially, but with our testimonies that we can share with others about salvation in Christ. With every resource that the Lord gives us, we should be good stewards of that. And then also Proverbs 27:12 tells us that a prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The fool goes on blindly and suffers the consequences. So when you have something inevitable, like an earthly departure coming up, it is wise to prepare for that and to plan ahead and be ready. We know that we will each face death one day, and we're wise to take precautions for that. And so we want to receive some wise counsel about preparing well for that, and I want to give you a little overview of what we have prepared today. First, we're going to hear from Stephen Olson, and Stephen Olson is a funeral director, and he's going to be sharing a little bit on funeral planning and arrangements, and then we'll have a brief time of Q&A with Stephen if you have any questions for him. And then secondly, we'll hear from Dee Stoll, and Dee is a patient advocate, and she understands all the ins and outs of caregiving, how to find a good caregiver, a good nursing home, local options, working with your doctor, assisted living options, memory care, so on and so forth. And Dee will have a brief question and answer time as well. And then we'll take a brief 10-minute break for the bathroom. If you want to get any snacks, we have them out in the courtyard there. And then we will hear from June Jantz after the break. And June Jantz is a lawyer and estate planner, and she's going to cover topics such as estate planning, revocable trusts, powers of attorney, avoiding probate, and then she'll be available for questions and answers. And if you have any questions for them, they'll be available in the foyer. And if you're watching online, if you have any questions for one of the participants, get in touch with me at justin@lincolnpress.org, and then I can get you in touch with any one of the participants. But would you join me in prayer this morning as we start? Lord, we thank you for just all that you do for us. You say in your word to prepare, to plan ahead, and it's foolish to see destruction ahead and to not plan. And Lord, you've allowed us to prepare well for the end of life by sending your Son into this world so that we could receive salvation. And you've allowed us to prepare well by just the grace that you've offered us in giving us eternal life as we place our faith in Jesus Christ. And thank you also for these participants that you've given us to share their wisdom that you've given them and help us to prepare well for our earthly departure and to do that for our loved ones as well. Pray for Stephen as he comes to share, that you'd be with him, and just give him your words to share with us today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Justin. We actually go back a few years in that. I remember when Justin was a little kid. And so we visited a few months ago on a Sunday, and I was hoping to see Pastor John and Pastor Jim, and they were at a mission trip, and lo and behold, Pastor Justin was preaching, and I was just so delighted. My name is Stephen Olson. I am privileged right now to be a full-time campus pastor for Lodi Horizon in Lodi. I spent the 90s at Quail Lakes Baptist Church. It's where I met Pastor John as a youth pastor, and my family absolutely adores him and his family. From there, I was called to First Baptist, and I was a worship pastor for 18 years there. When I resigned from First Baptist, there was a door open for a gentleman that led worship with me at Quail Lakes that owns, today he owns the Colonial Rose Chapel in Stockton, as well as Parkview Cemetery and Funeral Home in Manteca on French Camp Road near 99. And so he had asked me prior to resigning, when Pastor Jim resigned, he said, hey, I have an opportunity, come and work for me. And I wasn't ready to do that. But eventually, when I did resign, I've spent the last 4.5, almost 5 years with him. Some of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that we are not at all prepared for death. And I was only counseling families. I spent all day, every day during the week counseling families that have lost a loved one. And there are so many misconceptions and there's such a misunderstanding of what happens when someone dies. I quickly took the courses necessary for the state of California in order to present really my idea to churches is to help them plan better. Christians, we should be looking forward to meeting our Lord and Savior. I mean, I don't know about you, but death, we don't see death the same way. At least we shouldn't. It was the Apostle Paul in Thessalonica. He said, don't grieve as the rest of the world does who have no hope. And sometimes, many times, I'm trying to be nice about it, Christian families that I would sit down with were absolutely devastated and did not have an eternal view of what they needed to be prepared for. So what I wanted to talk to you about is simply pre-planning. You can do this. You can talk about it. I think in 2015, I had my family, I had my mom and dad come in. They didn't want to talk about it. I had them sit down with someone else so that they're a little bit more comfortable. But I'm one of 5 kids. I'm the number 4. There's 3 older than me. We don't always agree on everything. And so I thought, you know what? Let's find out what mom and dad want. They can put everything down. They can sign all the papers themselves. It will not involve anyone else. And then they can get exactly what they want. And if they need help paying for it, we can help them pay for it. And it's all done so that when that day comes, there's more peace than there is devastation. Okay? So what I brought in these folders that I have on the back table, I asked the owner if I could use a price sheet during COVID. He cut the prices quite a bit. One of the reasons why you pre-plan, once you pay for a pre-planning, it's fixed. So it doesn't matter how much the price goes up in the future. You pay when you sign up for a pre-need. You pay exactly what you paid that day, and that's important financially. Okay. The other thing that happens is when as a funeral counselor, I'm going to ask the people that you're survived by, I'm going to go down a list. It's called a 7100 law. You can look it up on the internet. In California, the right holder, the state determines who the person is who decides whether or not you're buried or cremated. And they decide by a list. So if you're married, then your spouse would be the right holder. And if you're not married, then the majority of your children. And then we look for them. And the public, if we can't find them, the public administrator for the county searches. And so it becomes this search for the right holder. Now, what you're going to hear a little bit later on about power of attorneys, the only one that the funeral industry recognizes is an advanced healthcare power of attorney. It's or medical power of attorney. In that power of attorney, there's a clause that says this agent controls the disposition of the decedent. Okay, so the agent, if there is a power of attorney, the power of attorney kind of trumps everybody but self. And the power of attorney comes along and decides what happens and whether or not you're cremated or buried, and has the authority to do that. So I know it's a lot of information. I've got about 30 minutes. And so that's where, if you have questions, please write them down. But the urgency of this is plan now. Price-wise, it's to your advantage. I put a little why advanced funeral planning makes sense in this folder, and you can read about it. It eases the burden. That's an understatement. I sat with families for hours. It's a burden. It's a burden figuring out what's going to happen, what goes on, who does what. Control the costs. I've talked about that. Protect against government intrusion. That certainly happens if that's why you're here today, to learn about how to plan properly. Be remembered how you want, okay? Think of it as a last love gift to your family. Think about just like an exclamation point, something on your life in which your family's like. So I'll tell you, when my dad passed away September 18th last year, it was devastating because, and all the family was there. And of course, I told you already, my mom and dad pre-planned. And so it was kind of like that while you're grieving, you have to figure out, okay, what do we do now? Who does what? Where do we go? What do we do? And I just kind of said, Dad already figured it out. You don't have to do anything. So the idea of pre-planning is that you would call one person. It's usually a doctor or a nurse or the coroner or someone for the county. They make one phone call to the funeral home and everything is taken care of. The funeral home is the one that takes care of everything based on your signature, your authorization when you do the pre-planning. If there is no signature, then the funeral home can't do anything until they find the right holder. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. This is a laborsome process that your family does not have to go through. It makes sense if you have no surviving family, doesn't it? And I certainly met a lot of people that I don't have any family. I'm the last surviving person. I'm here to plan. I want to pay for it. I want to sign all the paperwork because there won't be anybody to do it. And I don't want to leave it in the county's hands where it just becomes like a public thing. No one gets the ashes. No one sees the burial. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, it's very painful. And so you can eliminate all of that by simply pre-planning. Now, if you're worried about the cost, you can make payments. It's not to a funeral home. You never give your money to a funeral home. It always goes through an insurance company. It's called Great Western Insurance Company. And every dollar you put in there, whether or not you're finished paying for it before you die, goes to the family, goes to the arrangements. And so I've checked this thing out, and I believe I don't see the downfalls other than you're paying for your own service. No, it's like if you wanna leave that part to your family because that feels good to you, you go for it. But the only downfall is that I guess you're put in an uncomfortable position. Do I want burial or do I want cremation? And that you have to deal with. That's enough pressure just to figure that part out. But in this price guide, when you look at it, it gives these packages that the owner takes, just like the rose package, the gardenia package. The only difference between the two burial packages is one is 2 days. Do you want to be viewed or have a wake one day and then the next day have a service, maybe at a church or at the chapel, and then to the graveside, you understand? Or do you just want it to happen all in one day? You just simply want, and that's the gardenia package. It's the exact same package, less one day. And so some people say, well, I want to be, I don't want to be viewed. And those are good things to say, and the funeral home would write those things down, and we would have a closed casket. Technically, the word for that is visitation, not necessarily viewing. But you don't have to have that at all. You can have an immediate burial where there's nobody there. And it's all up to you. I've had families come in. I had a daughter come in that says, her mom did a pre-need long before I was there. And she wanted specific things, and she wanted a service and flowers and a burial. And the daughter came in and said, I don't want to do any of that. I just want you to cremate her. And I don't know if she thought she would be getting any kind of money back. I was trying to figure that out as she was talking to me. And here's the rule. When you make pre-planning and you pay for it, the funeral home is obligated. And there is no exception to follow exactly what you want. And trust me, there's a funeral home bureau that regulates that and makes sure that those things are done. So, like I've said, I've looked at this over and over. Even if you want to be cremated, there's a package here called the Magnolia in which you can be viewed and have a normal funeral service and then cremated at a later date. In which when you do pre-planning, you can choose, this is the child, grandchild, friend, neighbor friend that takes care of all my affairs. This is the person I want you to contact. This is the person I want to pick up my ashes. You understand? You can do that. Otherwise, that's all for the funeral home to figure out. And although it's a privilege to figure it out, you can cut all that out by simply stating what you want. And so there's a lot you're actually in control of. But because we don't talk about it, it ends up to be a mystery, kind of like what Pastor Justin was saying. It's like going into it like this, and then, and it's so funny, people come into my office and they tell me how it's going to happen. And that's where I feel bad, because they're grieving, and I've got to explain to them, no, that's not how it happens. It can't legally happen that way. Well, why not? And so what I'm trying to do today is simply say, you have an opportunity now while you are clear-minded. And I say that too because by the time, some people wait, they're not clear-minded and they can't get through the process because they can't keep it all straight. They get confused and they don't understand, and it's impossible for me to explain it to them. So that's why I ended up looking into this as a way to inform people. You're just going to save your family just a lot of, no one wants to do this while they're grieving. And so for me, for my family, I put my hand up and I said, hey, Dad he already wrote down everything he wanted, where he wanted to be buried, and it's all paid for. And my siblings were like, it was silent for about 3 or 4 seconds. It was like, okay. I mean, it neutralized any kind of what I felt stress building up in the room. It neutralized it, and immediately it was like, we're going to do exactly what Dad wanted us to do. And everyone was at peace with it, and everything went super smooth. I was so happy because it doesn't go like that. You know what I mean? Just because you're in a Christian family, trust me, it doesn't happen that way. So that's why advanced planning makes sense. And certainly if you have questions, let me know. I also put in here my planning guide. When we do pre-planning, we're going to fill out a working copy of your death certificate. And that's always fun, but and I'm being sarcastic, obviously, but this surprises families in the initial arrangement because they don't know all this stuff. And so in this my planning guide, the first 2 pages, this is all the information we're going to ask. A full name. There's a little bit of confusion on what the full name is, okay? And it's best to look at your Social Security card because that's what's going to check out at the top of the death certificate. So full name, address, race. They're going to be looking for a date of birth, father's full name, and where he was born. That catches people. So your dad's full name. If your kids don't know that, or grandkids don't know that, it'll say unknown. This is hard. What they do is they go and they search and they search and they search and they search for any kind of paperwork that has that. And sometimes they find it, sometimes they don't. But again, it's a piece of added stress you don't have to put your family through. You can simply put your father's name, the state or country, if not in the United States, Italy, you can put the country name, mother's full name, and it asks first, middle, last. If you don't know it, if your mother didn't have a middle, then she didn't have one, and you just, put a dash there. Marital status, this is a big deal. A lot of people put divorced when they're not divorced. Well, they weren't together for 20 years. Well, but they're still married. In the eyes of the state, they're still married. I know it. Darn it. You can't. You've got to put married, and then that puts other things kind of in place. But you have to know that. If married, the full name of the spouse. Education. They want to know the highest level of your education achieved. That's something that goes unknown because, maybe you didn't share that. Occupation, your occupation in life, you can control that. Some people have 5 occupation. You can pick which one you want to go on the death certificate. The years in occupation, where you live, the years lived in that county, and it goes on and on. And so you can see by the first 2 pages of this, and if you don't have this, we'll get one to you. Armed forces, if you served in the military, that's a big deal because there is no cost, but the family gets a flag. The funeral director has the opportunity to call whatever branch and see if they can get military honors for a service. Maybe it's a memorial service in the chapel or at a church, but they'll come. And what's really important, if you have served in the military, you have that DD 214. It's an honorable discharge paperwork, and it's like the key to everything. They don't believe me. They don't believe you. If you have that form, then it speaks volumes, and your family can have some kind of an honorable service for you, either with the folding of the flag, taps, and things like that. So you can, if you decide to have a memorial service at a ranch, they'll come out to a private place and they'll perform taps, and that's a big deal, and it's beautiful. And it's full of honor, and it's probably what your loved one would want, but you decide that. You decide, some people are doing this for their parents, some people are doing it for themselves, but either which way, plan ahead, please. I can't stress it to you enough. Right now, unless you know, it's just a big mystery, and it's kind of like, well, I don't have to deal with it, and I'll die, and my family will deal with it, but trust me, it would be advantageous for you to at least look at what I've put before you. Again, I told you, 100% of your monies that go to the planning, you can take a couple years to pay it off, reduce it to the ridiculous. It doesn't matter. After 24 months of payments, even if you sign up for a 3-year payment plan, it's guaranteed. It's guaranteed. Even if you die in the 3rd year and you're not finished paying it off, it's guaranteed. There's a lot of pluses to doing this. And so some people want to get it out of the way. I just want to pay for it, and that's fine. It's guaranteed the next day, right? It's guaranteed the moment they pay. So any questions? So I'll take questions. Yes, ma'am. Right.
I'm gonna pass you the mic so that the people who are watching online can hear the question as well.
What if you move? What if when the time comes I'm in some other state or whatever and I've prepaid?
Yes, ma'am. So when you initially sign up for a pre-planning, a pre-need arrangement, the beneficiary is the funeral home. So if you move to Montana and you call Great Western and say, I choose to switch my beneficiary from Colonial Rose to ABC Funeral Home, then it's a beneficiary. It doesn't cost you to do that. It's done between funeral homes, and I've done it many times. Because Colonial Rose is so inexpensive, there's a lot of people that have done funeral homes at other places and have decided we want to switch our pre-planning, and so we do that all the time. But just understand that it's the funeral home is only a beneficiary. You can change that, okay? Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
Is this a dead-end speech?
Say it again. What did he say?
Is this a dead-end speech?
A dead-end speech? Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dun-dun-dun.
First of all, I'd like to say that if it is somebody who's been in the military, you can get free of charge a very simple headstone that you contact them, and they will actually put the spouse on there too. And they also have a bajillion symbols, like Christian symbols, Buddhist symbols, Rastafarian symbols. I'm serious, it's a lot. Anyway, so that is something that, if cost is an issue, can be really helpful. And my question is, though, do you have any information about donating your body to science?
Well, you can put that little donation thing on your driver's license, and the hospital or nursing staff will record that information. And if you want, I think the local one is Donor West in the Bay Area, and what they do is they will pick up the deceased and take them to and be harvested, and then they drop off to the funeral home. So now it becomes challenging if there's a viewing. There's a few more questions the funeral home has to ask about what's harvested, and as long as it's not the face, then we can have a viewing, right? But a lot of people don't think about that, and they don't specify, and so the funeral home has to figure that out with the family.
Well, that's good, but I was thinking about donating your body to science for like medical school, for cadavers, for them to have an opportunity to, have cadavers to work on in medical school.
And so what you would probably do, depending on, what your desire is, you would have your body donated to science. When they're finished, it has to be disposed of property. So what they're going to do, they have to either decide cremation. You still get to the point to where you're like, what are we going to do? And even the school or organization, they have to figure that out. So you have to pre-plan for that. And a lot of people don't know that either. A lot of families are like, well, okay, what do I do now? Right. So that's a really good question. To go back to military, let me give you a little bit more information about that. You actually get a free burial if it's at a national cemetery. The burial itself, the cemetery costs, the plot, the opening and closing, and the headstone are included along with honors and things like that of no cost to the family. Now, I'm glad you said that because I forgot to say that this is funeral home planning. If you plan to be buried, there's a whole nother meeting with the cemetery and deciding what you want with the cemetery. We don't decide that for you. We just plan to go to the cemetery, but the next step, if you want to have a burial, say for instance, it's Stockton Rural Cemetery, and you have to go there and actually say, I want to prepay a plot and an opening and closing, and I want to be prepared so my family doesn't have to do that. So that's a separate, thank you for saying that. This is separate planning. Any other questions? And cemeteries don't do payment plans. That's kind of an at-need thing. They want their money right now. So, but you can pre-plan. Yes. Oh.
When you decide who your power of attorney is going to be, and something happens to them and you at the same time, do you have like first power, second power, or whatever? Is there a list?
You do.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, in there, they're called agents. And you have the first agent. If anything were to happen to that first agent, you would have to show a death certificate or a letter from that first agent that says, I waive my rights to the second agent. And then we can use that as a proper document. But yeah, oftentimes the first agent has passed away, and so it's always good to pick a second. Yeah.
If they have a will and the executor, does the executor and the power of attorney have to be the same, or can they be different?
That's a good question. So just because there's a will, it means nothing to the funeral home. Well, I'm the executor. It means nothing unless there's a direct, advance directive of healthcare. Like I said, there's only one document that has that clause that says this person has control of the disposition, not the executor. It doesn't matter what's in a will. Those documents can't be used by the funeral home. It has to be notarized, right? Or there's a place before the notary page of two witnesses, having two witnesses. So a lot of people would say, I have the proper document, and they come in and it's a general power of attorney or it's a durable, and it has all to do with the finances and property and stuff, which means nothing to a funeral director. It has to be a healthcare power of attorney, and some healthcare power of attorneys don't have the clause. So I've got to read through all those pages and make sure I come to that one place. And so just make sure if you're doing a power of attorney, do an advance directive. Yeah, make sure it's that, because that for sure has the clause in there. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? I know, man, I just feel like I've just been full of information. But any questions at all that you can think of before I? All right.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. All right, at this time, I'm going to invite Dee Stoll, and she's a patient advocate and is here to share with us today. And then after Dee shares, we'll take about a 10-minute break, and you can feel free to use the restroom or grab some snacks at that point. Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome. Good morning. I see some people here that I know. I'm really happy that you decided to spend your Saturday morning this way. As a means of introduction, I'd just like to share how I became involved as a patient advocate. I'm a native of Louisville, Kentucky, been in California almost 29 years, and I have a bachelor's degree in English and have worked in a various variety of medical and legal fields, health insurance companies. As I tell people, jack of all trades, master of none. But with that being said, about 3 years ago, I was invited by a gentleman whose family I had known for about 10 years to start driving him to medical appointments. So that's how this whole venture began. But I'd also like to say that I think that for this point in my life, at the age I am, God uniquely gifted me to serve people in this way. And it's really a calling, I believe, on my life at this point, advocating for people. And it's a very unique calling because every single day is different. And each of us have individual needs, so we never know what may come our way when we might be in need of an advocate. I'm going to refer to my notes. Do you have a copy of my notes there? Yes, okay. I'm going to just share a few other things so I can stay on track here with you. First of all, the areas of service would be Stockton, Tracy, Modesto, Turlock. I'm really not going to serve anyone beyond those areas simply because it's a matter of time and expense to everybody involved. So with that being said, I do have a team that has kind of put itself in place, so to speak. As I meet people, God just uniquely sends people my way. And it's been very interesting to see that if I need someone, He uniquely provides the specific person that I need at that specific time. So right now I have a gal that's 38 years old that's a software project manager, and on her, shall we say, downtime, she has been serving one of my clients in a very unique way. I also have several RNs, Bachelor of Science degrees in nursing, nurses with 40 years plus experience. Right now I have 3 on my team that operate in different ways at different times as required. And beyond that, I also have a local attorney that I consult with, because sometimes when I'm working with you, there might be a legal issue that arises, and so I will consult with him. And with your permission, if you don't have your own attorney with whom you're well acquainted, we will consult with him on an as-needed basis. As a patient advocate, several years ago, I was working with an individual that was in a nursing home. She was actually a friend, and she called me and she said, "Can you help me?" And I went to visit her, and believe it or not, in this nursing home, and you may have had the same experience, there were a number of issues that were not being met for her. And it was very complicated. The nursing home's administrator had changed, and so many things were going wrong with her care. And it really hurt my heart, because I was going, what can I do? So I just became very assertive at that point and stepped out, talked to the administrator, talked to the gals in the front office, explained my concerns, and we got the ball rolling. And if you've ever had any experience with doctors or nursing homes or in-home caregivers, other types of facilities, unless you are really going to be there to see what's going on, unless you're going to be really willing to speak out and advocate for yourself, there will be some things that will not be done according to, quote, protocol. So it's really good if you're in a position and you feel like you need help, you can I will give you my card. You can call me. I'm not going to charge you just to consult with you initially, but it's good to know that you have somebody that you can call and ask a question. In her particular case, the issues were so severe that I actually called the county ombudsman. Does anybody know what the ombudsman is, or who they are, or what they do? Good, one of you do. And so I got in contact with the county, and most people think ombudsmen are paid. They're really not. There is one woman at the county that is in charge of, quote, the ombudsman's office, and there are a number of volunteers in that office. And for instance, if I give a call for you, I will leave your name and your information and what the situation is, and this information is then given to one of the volunteers that work in the office. There are only a very few ombudsmen, probably less than 10, most recently. So this information will be given to them. They will go to your nursing home or your facility. They will do a thorough investigation, detail anything that's not okay, or anything that's not protocol per se, any abuse. I mean, just a myriad of issues that need to be addressed. They will handle this. And then they report back to the county ombudsman head, and they attempt to fix these issues. I have never had a situation where they were not fixable, but I am very persistent. So if I get involved with an administrator or a change in the administration at a nursing home, I will continue to call or be there on site to make sure that the issue is finished and handled appropriately if you are working with me. I want to share a couple of case studies with you, because I think that's the best way for you to understand perhaps what I'm doing. And this can run the gamut of nursing home issues, assisted living. You have trouble getting with your doctor, just all kinds of things that come up, and you're sitting there at home thinking, okay, what in the world am I going to do now? That's when you call me, and I help you jump through those hoops because of the background and the experience that I have to figure out this problem for you. Most recently, last year, I was dealing with a gentleman from a former church relationship. He is a widower. He lived alone for quite a while, I think about 4 years. He had a number of health challenges. And in November, he wasn't really sure. He thought it was a stroke, a TIA. He really didn't have any idea what was going on. So at that point, he pushed his life alert button. He sat in his chair. The emergency people came, and he said, I need to go to the hospital. I don't know what's wrong with me, but something is wrong. Unbeknownst to me, even though I knew him well, I was not contacted at that point. He ended up at Dameron Hospital, and they felt that his situation was so severe, he needed to be transferred to a hospital in Sacramento. Thanksgiving night, I was sitting at my dining room table, and I got a phone call that, we'll call him John, that John wasn't doing very well. John was trying to climb out of the bed. They had to restrain him. He was talking out of his head. He wasn't making sense. He couldn't eat very well. He could not swallow. And I was actually executor and beneficiary on his estate, but he had notated me as the individual to call in the event of any emergency. And so we discussed what was going to happen. They didn't really know if he would live, but long story short, he did make it through that experience. And when they got ready to discharge him, they called me. And I'm well aware of all the different nursing homes, acute care facilities, rehab, home care facilities, and agencies. So I told them where I wanted them to take him. So they discharged him to this facility here in Stockton. Now, before COVID, it was a great facility. No problem. I'd had experience with this facility with people doing rehab there. And so I said, I want him to go to the best facility. He was a military veteran and had great insurance. He could go anywhere. So they took John there, and about 10:30 that night after he had arrived there, I get this call from John. And I won't tell you exactly what he said, but he said, you got to get me out of here. You got to take me to a hotel. And I said, we can't do that. So long story short, there were a number of issues going on there. And I told him to sit tight until the next morning. I went over there and met with the administration, with his nurse, and a lot of things were happening that were inappropriate. For instance, at 10:30 at night, they wanted to do a TB test on this man, and a number of other things that were totally unnecessary. So if you get my point, it was probably the first good night's rest John had had in 2 weeks with his illness, and all these procedures were going on. I met with the nursing staff, got things going in the right direction, but unfortunately, within less than a 5-day period, he'd been moved to 3 different rooms, and the care was all over the place. Nobody knew what they were doing. So if you look on the form there, you'll see something that says against medical advice. John's doctor was not available because it was during the holiday season. So I took the bull by the horns and signed him out of this facility against medical advice. I don't always advise doing that, but if you're in a situation where your needs are not being met and you feel like you're not getting appropriate care, you do have that option to do that. And I explained to them exactly why we were doing this, and I brought John home and arranged for 24/7 caregivers for him. Once again, it was really exciting because every step of the way, God provided exactly what he needed, what I needed, the exact individuals that were available at the specific times that we needed them. And then John ended up in assisted living. He had a brain bleed, and he died within about 3.5 days. But with this whole experience, I was able to meet a number of needs that John had. And basically, this would carry over to anybody I would work with. We arrange for the caregivers at home. I arrange for someone to come in from that gap time of 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. to check on him, to prepare his breakfast, make sure he was settled for the day. And then when he was in assisted living, I handled and facilitated the move-in for John and took care of all those things. All he had to do was just sit in his chair and watch this happen. I took him to assisted living, handled the registration, the admission process, which at that point seemed like we were getting a home mortgage because it was very lengthy and exhausting, especially for a gentleman that's 87 years old. And then when he did have the surgery, I was there with him, and the doctor called me that night and said he was not doing well. I went to the hospital with his pastor, and I sat there with John until he went into the arms of Jesus. Dealt with the resident that was on staff because he wanted to say that the cause of death was something other than what it was. John had not had a fall. And I don't know how these things happen, but they just do. People assume, things have happened to you and they really haven't. So for sake of his death certificate and burial and that whole process, I did facilitate making sure that the records were absolutely correct before I left the county hospital that day. And then, of course, I worked with someone like Steve to prepare his funeral, etc. So I'd like to give you another case study that's a little interesting. Right now, I'm working with 2 brothers and a family, both of whom have cancer. The one gentleman I just mentioned to you initially, where I drove him basically to doctor's appointments in preparation for his surgery, the surgery never happened. It was canceled because they determined he had a very rare cancer in his lungs. And the doctors, to me, this is a situation that's so difficult because all along we're driving to all these appointments, every procedure imaginable. And at the very end, we're not doing surgery. He did not know why. And so at that point, I happened to have a friend who is a doctor with Sutter Health in Modesto. So I called him because this gentleman was working with Sutter Health. And we determined that he had this very rare cancer. The doctor got permission from my client to speak to me. And in other words, we kind of did a verbal over the phone HIPAA form and permission, and he explained what was going on. At that point, we went back, my client and I went back to another doctor at Sutter and ascertained he needed treatment for the cancer. And now every 3 weeks, I'm driving him to Sacramento for his infusion treatment. And I follow the whole process. I drop him off, I take him in, I sign him in, I wait with him during the infusion. Anything that he needs during that time, I take care of that. And then we drive back to Stockton, and I make sure that he's safe in his home. For this patient, I also pick up his prescriptions and take him to the lab because he does not have a cell phone, a computer, or a car. So he kind of gets a lot more care. At the same time, I'm dealing with his brother right now who has cancer in 4 different places in his body. And because of that cancer, he has a trach tube and a feeding tube. And there have been so many issues with this gentleman because he went from being pretty stable at home to having his carotid artery rupture. And he's been having all different kinds of care since May. So I followed him through each of these facilities, acute care rehabs, And you have to be very vocal. Sometimes they might say, oh, well, we want to send John to such and such a facility. And I happen to know that that may not be the best facility. And if your insurance or your ability to pay to wherever you would personally like to go, I am able to meet with the charge nurse, the social worker, and say, this is my client's preference. How can we facilitate this? So not only do I help people with medical issues, there are just all kinds of issues that might come up where you would need help. For instance, another client I'm working with is a gal that had a workers' comp injury. And this has been going on for about 2 years unsuccessfully. The attorney that she's working with is doing nothing. Oh, you've got a knee problem? Okay, well, I'll get back to you. Just go home and relax till you hear from me. And literally, in 2 years, nothing has been happening. And her whole career is at stake. So somehow she called me. She has no idea where she got my name and number, but I happen to think it was a God thing. Because when I work with somebody, my main focus is not only what do you need from me, but we're doing this as unto the Lord. And I also want to make sure that your relationship, if you do have one with God or Christ, that we can work together and bring him glory through whatever we do together. That's my real focus. It's not about the money, what I'm charging you. It's more about your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health in the process. So she called me and we went to Modesto. The attorney I work with here in Stockton happened to have a great contact, and we immediately got in with this attorney. I took her down there. We met with him. I took notes through the whole process, because sometimes if you're meeting with your doctor, an attorney, or someone else, you're so stressed out. You leave and you go, I have no idea what the doctor told me to do. And sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's very complicated, but I'm the one sitting there taking notes and listening to them while you're trying to figure out what's going to happen next. So through this process, he got the ball rolling for her. She is now with a doctor that is getting permission for her full knee replacement. And hopefully within the next 2 weeks, her whole problem is going to be solved and will come to a conclusion and a good end. And she can go back to work or she can retire. Let me see if there's something else that I think is really important to share with you. There's just a myriad of situations and events that can occur in your life that you think you have no idea how to handle. That's when you give a call. I tell people you need to know 2 words, call D. And if I can't help you, I'll send you someplace that can help you. Now, is anyone here familiar with the POST? The POST is a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. And the only reason I bring this up is because if you're in a nursing facility or if you have any kind of a health issue where you may be admitted to the hospital, especially if you're over 60 years of age, everybody should have a POST. And I never really knew what this was till a friend of mine said, oh, I've got to do my POST. And I'm going, what in the world is a POST? If you have to call the emergency 911, this should be either on your refrigerator or when the emergency people come in, maybe it's your by your alarm, by your garage door, wherever would be a place that they would see it right away. It tells them exactly what you want and do not want. And let's say in the case of my client that has the trach tube and a feeding tube, he doesn't want any more chemo or radiation. And if he is in a critical state, does he want full measures, full code to sustain his life? Or does he want something minimal? This is a document that you complete with your primary care physician, and you sign and date this, and your physician also dates it, and he has a copy of it in your file. So whether or not you go to the nursing home, a hospital, this is there and it follows you, so everybody knows exactly what to do. And you may be in such a point, you know, some people are in such a state with some disease or illness that they absolutely don't want to have life-sustaining measures provided. Because with my friend John, when they called and said his blood pressure was 40/20, I knew exactly what that meant. He said, "Do you want us to keep him alive?" And he said, "We can keep him alive for as long as you want." And I said, "Can you keep him alive till his pastor and I get there?" And he said, "Yes." So basically, that's what they did. And then, you know, we followed the procedures that he had wanted. Do you have any questions at this point for me? Carol?
Have you had a situation where the family wants you to perform services, but the client may be not helpful, actually interfering, negative?
So far, that hasn't happened, but I've had a situation that arose yesterday that's kind of like that. It could end up being that way, and I will share. I will never divulge names, of course, or specific details to protect the identity of those with whom I work. Everything I do with you, if I work with you, is confidential. My husband doesn't know anything about this. The files are kept private. It's just the way that I have to work, so that everybody feels secure. I met a lady at the phone store 2 weeks ago, and God said, "Give her your card." And we're both over 12. And so I said, "I don't know if you'll ever need me, but I'd like to give you my card." She called me 2 days ago and she said, "Can you meet me at Bodine's on Friday at 3 o'clock? I want you to meet my friend." I said, "Sure." So I met with these two ladies. And it's a very difficult situation because her husband has vascular dementia or mild cognitive impairment. He has seen 2 neurologists, one of whom I know. And I also know the facility that she's dealing, the health organization that she deals with. With that being said, this woman had had a very difficult experience with her spouse. And there were some attorneys that got involved, a judge. It turned out to be somewhat of a criminal case. I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is kind of high drama. This is a little more than I've been involved in. But with that being said, she is going to need some daycare for her spouse. And he's no longer driving. And with the relationship between the two of them and the whole scenario that I won't even go into, that almost blew me out of the chair when she started sharing the details. I told her I would be happy to do this. I have a good relationship with Oakmont and Brookside, which is assisted living. And they do have a memory care unit there. And I believe they have a day program. So right now I will be researching it because it was too late yesterday. I will be researching the various day programs here in Stockton, and we're going to attempt, hopefully, to get him into a day program because this woman looks like a strong wind would blow her away. She is totally and completely exhausted from trying to keep herself safe and to protect the family assets and all the documents. So briefly, in the 2 hours I was with her, I gave her a homework assignment and said, okay, you need to get these original documents copied, put the originals in either the safety deposit box or get them locked up away from him. I gave her a number of tasks to do to make sure that everything would go smooth as silk when we get to that point, hopefully, of putting him in a day program. I don't see that it will be a problem, but it could be, Carol. And so at that point, she does have power of attorney, and I asked her how she felt about a conservatorship. I'm not a lawyer, but I do have, I have worked for attorneys and have some legal background, as I mentioned. And this one family, the two brothers, I helped their mother facilitate a conservatorship. So we did discuss that, because it may come to the point where a power of attorney allows you to do certain things, but conservatorship, if she needs this will give her full control over anything that would need to be handled for or with her spouse. The only difficult thing about a conservatorship that I can tell you, having worked with an attorney, if she would need this, the cost is about $2,500, which quite honestly is, I think, pretty reasonable for a legal matter. And you meet with the lawyer, you draw up the documents, and in the case of this gentleman, because he has dementia, it has to go through the probate section of the court, and they actually would bring a probate clerk in to question him. And if he can't answer certain questions, looking at his medical records, if they feel he really is incompetent, then the probate clerk tells the judge or makes a decision, yes, I think this needs to be granted. This is going to be a very unique situation. I'm glad you brought this up, Carol, because with this gentleman, these two ladies agreed. If I met him on the street, I would think nothing would be wrong with John Doe. But she lives with him, and every single day with John is different because she never knows what he's going to do with it, with this dementia. So in her situation, if need be, I would take her to an attorney and figure out what we can do. But because she has power of attorney, it might be a little simpler. Did that answer your question? Sometimes it seems like I'm going on a rabbit trail, but there's so many things that come up that are totally unexpected every day for me. And for instance, one thing I'm really happy about, I've been able to gain the respect of some doctors in the community. And with this gentleman that has the trach tube and the feeding tube, he can't speak. And since he had the carotid artery rupture and the stent implanted, now he is very hard of hearing. So I have to speak loudly to him. And when we were at the hospital the other day with his emergency situation, I had to tell everybody, if you talk in a normal tone of voice, he's not going to hear you. So, you know, there might be a time where you will need somebody to advocate for you, though it seems very simple. I will also, I got his permission in writing and took the form that I had notarized and witnessed by him. And the other thing that's very sad in his situation, he's had cancer for 2 years. None of his providers have said, you have X number of years to live. After this situation is over, then this is going to happen. He thinks he's going to go on a motorcycle trip in a couple of weeks with his friend. He truly does. And so at that point, I just had to say, okay, I need to meet with your doctor. Because I think we all have the right to know, am I going to be here in 6 months or a year? What's my prognosis? What does my next month or week look like? What's it going to be in 3 to 5 years? With his brother, I'm not very concerned because the rare cancer he has took 10 years to metastasize from his leg to his chest. So I'm not too concerned about him. But with this gentleman, he started eating food on his own, which he had no business doing, and he got himself in trouble. So, of course, I had all the appropriate forms when we went to the hospital. But going back to the oncologist, I just called the oncology office and said, John Doe has no idea about his prognosis. None of you have told him anything. And he thinks he's going on a motorcycle trip. And the doctor said, well, who told him this? I said, nobody did, but he thinks that's what he's going to do. So he agreed to meet with me. And I basically explained what he had been going through since May because the doctor had not seen him in over a year. Then I called his doctors at UC Davis, and we've got video visits scheduled for Wednesday because neither of those doctors have shared anything about his prognosis. So this man's just living his life, not knowing what is going to happen next, which, to my way of thinking, is totally unreasonable, and it's not okay. So I just say, if you feel like you have a need, feel free to call me. We'll look at your situation. If I can't help you, I will find a resource for you. I will find someone to do what needs to be done. Any other questions? There's a question in the back.
Okay.
Well, it's obvious you're a very dedicated and compassionate advocate. But if we lived outside of this area where you don't work, how do we find somebody who can help us in our situation? Is there a list of criteria that we should look at as a patient advocate?
If I may ask you, are you from out of Stockton?
Yes, I am, but I'm not. Yeah, yes.
Well, may I ask where you are?
I'm in Modesto, but I'm just talking about if I have a sister who lives in Southern California, and she may need somebody who's a patient advocate, and I wouldn't know how to look for one. I mean, what do I look for?
It's kind of a difficult question, and yet it isn't. And it's very hard to be specific, but if you feel like there is a need there, you can call me, and we will figure that out together. Once I obtain information from you about her situation and exactly what's going on, we can jump through the different hoops with the doctors or the care facilities or... And I'm glad you brought that up because about 4 years ago, I had a very close friend that had had knee surgery. She lives in Texas. She's never married. She is one of those people that is kind of walking through life scared, not really knowing what to do next. And I just called to check on her. And she started telling me all these things that were happening to her in the nursing home. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is crazy. They tell her to throw her dirty towels on the floor. The aide comes in and puts the dirty towels back up on the rack. She has a glass of milk for lunch, and she realizes when she gets finished, the glass is so dirty she can't even see through it. This is what's going on, literally. She's in serious pain at 10 o'clock at night, and she goes to the nurse's station, and the gal says, well, what is it now, Miss Brown? What is it that you need? And I'm going, okay, you've told me enough. So I went straight to the top. I started with an advocacy group in Texas, the state of Texas, and called the consumer group that would deal with nursing homes. And then, I alerted them to the situation. And then I personally called the nursing home and spoke to the administrator. A long story short, we got things resolved. And they knew that she had someone watching and advocating for her, so things got better very quickly. But I'm telling you, if you don't have someone advocating for you, and I'll just share this, I don't know how much time we have, but this was kind of an interesting situation along the same lines. I have a very dear friend here. We share the same birthday. We've done a lot of things in our life together, though we're totally different. And she called me about a month ago, and she said she was really frantic, and she was crying, and she said, "Can you help me?" And I said, "Well, what do you need?" And she said, "Well, my husband's in the hospital, and it's a bad situation. They want to discharge him." And I said, "Okay, I'm here working with the client with the trach tube, et cetera. I'm finishing up here. If you can pick me up, I'll go to the hospital with you." So at that time, I didn't have my patient advocate badge, which is kind of a joke, but I thought, oh, makes me look more official, right? So this was over Labor Day, and it was the Friday before, and he had been a heavy smoker for over 50 years, severe COPD, pneumonia with sepsis, and he had been rushed to the hospital earlier that week. They put him in ICU for 2 days, and then they downgraded him and put him in a regular room, and she had gotten a call that they wanted to I call it put on the street, discharge him. However, as most of you know, when you go to the hospital now, you don't get to have Dr. Smith come and visit with you like the old days, as I say. You have a hospitalist that is hired by an organization or a company that serves Dameron, San Joaquin County, St. Joe's, wherever you're going to go. And you may not, typically, from what I have seen and witnessed, you do not have the same hospitalist every single day. They come in, they look at your record 3 or 5 minutes, maybe, and they decide, oh, well, Carol's got a bum finger here, so we're going to get that fixed. The next hospitalist comes in and does something else. So I'm not sure if this was a hospitalist that had been following this gentleman the entire time. But this hospitalist said, okay, he's been here 4 days, he's ready to be discharged. The issue was they had asbestos removal going on in their home, pretty severe throughout the home. That's just for starters. There are a lot of other issues with that home that were in the midst of rehab. And the doctor said, well, he's ready to go home. And she said, I can't take him home. And they said, well, you have to take him home. So I told, we went in and we sat down. The doctor had already signed the order 2 days before. 2 social workers come in, 2 ganged up on us, literally. I'm not kidding you. White coats, the whole bit. And were very threatening, literally harassed her and me, and said, Mr. So-and-so has been discharged by Dr. So-and-so 2 days ago. You need to take him home. And I said, Mr. So-and-so has the right to be discharged into a safe and healthy home environment. And you're telling me that he is too healthy to go to a nursing facility or a rehab. He has to go home. But he is not going home as long as I'm sitting here with his wife, and it's not going to happen. So you need to tell us what to do next. Then they sent the charge nurse in. But meanwhile, we wait 45 minutes, just sitting there. And I had to deal with her husband because he's fidgety after being in the hospital for 5 days. You got to get me out of here. You know, yeah, I can go home. I can go to my brother's and all these crazy things. And so then we talked to the charge nurse, and she said, well, there's no reason why we have to keep him. Long story short, we ended up speaking with another social worker from another medical provider. And they told us the only option would be we could take him home against medical advice. You remember we talked about that earlier, against medical advice. Or we could file a Medicare appeal. And both social workers and the charge nurse and the other social worker that came in said, you can file the Medicare appeal, but you won't be successful. You will be denied. Now think about that. You can file the appeal, but we already know you're going to be denied. who do you think is carrying the ball in this game? It's not the patient. And I'd never filed a Medicare appeal before, but you know what? Game on. I'll give it a shot. And so basically what ended up happening, the threatening part was, if we keep him here, you could be liable for $9,000 a day for his care. This is how they scare people, because what happens, and I'm going to use Carol because I've known Carol a long time and we're good friends. Carol's in the hospital, and let's just say she has pneumonia with sepsis, okay? I've had that, so I know how this works. She's in the hospital with pneumonia and sepsis, and you go in and they get out a book, not a book really, but they have a guideline, a protocol. And I did not know this till about 3 years ago when my husband was ill, okay? And we had a registered nurse tell us this. You go into the hospital with this condition, and Medicare basically, even though you might be not over 12, you could be whatever age you are, Medicare basically controls the hospital and the insurance companies. And they say you have this condition and you get X number of days to be treated, and then you're going to be discharged, period, end of story. When this happened to me, I got discharged after 2 days, and I was in no way ready to go home. But at that point, I was not a patient advocate, and I had no idea that I could have had a say in this situation. So we did file the Medicare appeal, and at the same time, her husband stayed in the hospital, and yes, they did deny the appeal, and we're still waiting to find out whether or not they're going to get the big $9,000 bill for 3 days, which would be $27,000. And we did bring him home, and I helped her with, you know, some home health care things and made sure. But the beauty of the whole thing was, while we were waiting on the appeal, which takes approximately 3 days, and it's all done by telephone. It's a recorded conversation. So I made sure when I spoke to the gentleman on the phone, I made it sound as bad as I possibly could. Asbestos removal going on in the home, this is not a safe environment, okay? This is not okay. And he did get to stay in the hospital, and he was not discharged until I gave the charge nurse permission when my friend called and said, okay, all the asbestos is gone. I think it's safe for him to be brought home. At that point, I called the charge nurse and said, okay, we can have him discharged now. And everybody was happy.
We're gonna take about a 5-minute break here. Obviously, Dee is someone that you'd want in your corner going through all this. And Dee and Stephen both are, and as well as June, who is going to come up and speak to us after about a 5-minute break or so. Feel free to grab some snacks. We got some drinks out there. Use the restroom. We'll come back in. We'll hear from June. June and Dee and Stephen will all be in the foyer afterwards for a little bit. If you have any other questions or want to stay in touch with them, they have their contact information. But thank you so much, Dee. Take about a 5-minute break, come back in, and then we'll hear from June. Well, we're going to get started here again. This is June Jantz, and you may recognize the last name. How are you related to Fred?
He's my father-in-law.
Okay, so Fred is her father-in-law, and thank you for being here with us, June. And if you have any questions after June shares, I'll bring the mic around again, and just feel free to ask.
So good morning. I do have a cold, so if I sound sniffly, I'm not emotional. I just have a minor cold. Anyway, so I grew up in Modesto, and I attended Southern Methodist University and Oxford University for my undergraduate degree, which I completed in 3.5 years. And then I attended UC Hastings College of the Law for law school and graduated in 1993. I took the bar exam that year in July and passed that fall, thankfully. I have now practiced for over 28 years, almost 29. Initially, or in my early years, I was a deputy district attorney here in San Joaquin County. I then worked for a nonprofit Christian law firm in Sacramento, defending religious liberties, parental rights in the school, First Amendment rights, that type of thing. I had a good friend who does accounting who begged me to go learn how to do estate planning because she said she had hundreds of clients who needed trusts, and I said there was no way I would ever go out on my own. We should know better than to tell God. There's no way we will do something. So I talked to the lady who had actually drafted my husband's and my trust, who was just a really neat Christian attorney. And I said, what do you think? I've been asked to do estate planning. And she said, you're so bright, just go buy the books, you're gonna be fine. So I did that at the end of 2003, and I opened my practice in February of 2004, and I've had my own private practice since February of 2004. And I'm only less than a mile away from here now. So that's kind of my background. So I've done the estate planning now for over 18 years. My husband, Phil, and I do reside here in Stockton. We have 4 children, 3 of whom are now in college, and we attend Quail Lakes Baptist Church. So today we're going to talk about what is estate planning and who needs it, okay? Many people think of estate planning in context of when somebody passes away. That is a part of estate planning, but I think equally significant, if not more so, is what happens during your lifetime. So in my mind, we do estate planning because we're listing the individuals who will have the ability to advocate for us, either financially or medically, and perhaps even manage things for us if we actually lose the ability to manage things for ourselves. So, we're going to look at what your options are in regards to estate planning. So it's potentially a revocable trust. Most people think of a testamentary will, you know, the movies where somebody says, this is the last will and testament of so-and-so, and they read it. That's when you just do a will, okay? We also have powers of attorney. We have both a financial one, it's called a durable power of attorney. It can take effect immediately when you sign it, or only upon incapacity if you choose to not have anybody help unless you've lost capacity. Then we also have the medical one. I think Dee alluded to that, the Advanced Healthcare Directive, which allows you to name somebody to advocate for you medically. So those are kind of the components. They're smaller documents, but those are the main components of an estate plan. So what are some updates for those of you who might already be familiar with estate planning? As of this year, you can now give gifts to any individual up to $16,000 a year before you have to file a gift tax return, okay? So if you have extra money and you don't know what to do with it, you can give gifts away, and you could write as many, literally $16,000 checks as you wanted between January 1 and December 31 of this year and never file a gift tax return, meaning you don't exceed what you're allowed to give in any one year. So let's say you're a married couple and you want to help one of your kids buy a new home, and your child happens to be married. Mom and dad could each write a $16,000 check to the daughter and to the son-in-law, or son and daughter-in-law, and all of that would be exempt from any type of gift tax, okay? So just know that that's a new number this year. It's gone up from $15,000 last year. Also, the estate tax, the federal estate tax exemption, meaning what can you give away during life and death, again, beyond that $16,000 a year, is now up to $12.06 million. So most of us don't have to worry about that. I've had several clients tell me, I wish that was a problem, June. Anyway, but that's how much you can give away at death without paying any federal estate tax. And for a married couple, you can technically take advantage of twice that amount. So $24.12 million. Not that most of you care about that number. But the current estate plan does expire at the end of 2026, meaning it will go back to, I think it's like roughly 5.49 million. So again, that's just kind of where we're at now, and what we all kind of wait every year as estate planners to see what DC is going to do. And it's kind of a waiting game for us, and it changes how we address estate planning issues, and unfortunately there's not much coming out right now out of DC, but it does change a lot of times with different administrations. So just always be aware of that, please. So those are some of the things that have changed, okay? So let's go into what kind of assets are we talking about when we talk about what are we planning for? Obviously we have children, some people really care about pets, we have real property like houses, bank accounts, investment accounts, retirement accounts, life insurance policies, stocks, and all of your personal property, jewelry, art, furnishings, whatever it might be. So these are all kinds of assets you should think of when we're talking about what estate planning entails or addresses, okay? So what are your options? Let's say you own no real property, you do not own a home. You can name on every single account that you own payable on death beneficiaries. So like on a retirement account, when you set one up, they often ask, you fill out a form, who will your beneficiaries be? So you can name those beneficiaries, and then that account, when you pass away, goes to that named person or persons, okay? You can do the same on any other type of financial account. So checking, savings, money market, CD, annuity, whatever it might be, you can name individuals, and those accounts will go to those individuals when you pass away, all right? Meaning they don't have to go through court or anything else. So you can name beneficiaries on accounts if you don't own real property and you're trying to stay out of court when you pass away, okay? That is one option. Once you own a house, it's a different ballgame. So some people say, what do we want to do? Some people say, if I do an estate plan, I'm going to die. I hear that a lot. So I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but estate planning has nothing to do with whether or not you will die, because unless you didn't know, you will all die at some point, okay? That's a given. So what we're doing is really planning. We're really trying to be good stewards of what we have to make sure that whatever we have goes in the most efficient way, hopefully with the least cost to our family members after we're gone. But some people say, no, I don't want to plan. I had a lady tell me that. I was brought in, and she was in hospice. So I met her in the hospital. She's hooked up to tubes and everything. And I explained the whole estate planning process, and she said, I just don't think I'm ready for that. And I said, okay. And I said, may I ask why? And she actually said to me, well, I'm afraid if I do this, I'll die. And I went, oh, okay. So sometimes God gives me insights, and I said, is there somebody that you wouldn't want things to go to when you pass away? Can you tell me that? So she described her family to me, and then she told me there was one particular individual who had largely written them off. And she said, I really don't want him to get anything. So once she described her family to me, I said, just so you know, if you pass away, the legislature in California has already determined he would get 100%, because that's what we call intestate succession, meaning if you don't plan, you've determined that California legislators know what you want to do and what you would have wanted to do, and they tell us where everything should go. So I told her, I said, that one individual you don't want to get anything actually gets 100% unless you tell us differently and we put it in writing. She said, oh, and then she passed away 2 weeks later. So you have to think through these matters, because sometimes there are natural people you want to receive things and other people, for whatever reason, you don't. So do you want California to determine? Do you want the government of California to tell you where your assets go, or do you want to decide that? Okay, that's really kind of the crux of the issue. So with no will, you're going to, when you pass away, you're going to go through the court process, which we call probate. Just so you know, right now it's $435 for me to file a petition to open the probate. It takes about 10 weeks initially to even get into court, to petition the court. Provided that you have all the information the court wants. they would sign an order for probate, allowing somebody to step in as the administrator. Again, this is if you have no will. And then we have to start filing what's called an inventory and appraisal. So we take all the assets that the individual left behind, we send it to the probate referee, which is required under California law. He appraises the assets and charges us 0.1% of the gross value of the assets. That's his fee. So if he appraises $500,000 of assets, his fee is a minimum of $500, okay? So we go through probate, we pay creditors, final expenses, whatnot. It takes about 12 to 18 months minimum to get through court. Assets are frozen until you get into court, just so you know. I have a lot of people saying we need to pay bills. We can't, okay, until somebody actually is appointed. I have one right now where the lady actually had a will, and we still go through court, by the way, if you have a will. A will has to go through probate in order to be effective. So we're trying to get it approved, and what the court said is because she died with no children, she had none, and her husband died less than 15 years before her, we had to notify all of his intestate heirs that she was opening a probate, or that a probate was being opened on her behalf. And that was 22 individuals from her husband's side that we had to notify simply that a probate's opening, because technically they could file perhaps a claim against the estate. And so her side is saying, why in the world do we have to do this? And I'm like, well, it's required by law because you're going through court. We still don't have an approval from the judge. We've now been waiting for over a month since the last hearing, which was continued from the first hearing. So people are anxious and they're frustrated because you are now at the mercy of the court as to when you're going to get to move forward. So they can't sell her house, which is sitting vacant in Stockton, not a good thing. They can't sell her cars, which again are in the driveway. So again, these are things that people are concerned about, but nobody has the authority to do anything, okay, until the judge approves it. The real cost of probate, though, is what we pay to the attorney and the executor in a probate. And right now, oh, by the way, the other initial cost is Stockton Record. We have to file what we call a notice of petition to administer estate. And have you ever seen in the Stockton Record that little tiny column says a probate's opening? Right now, the cost is $899 to run that it's a 3-day, it runs for 3 different days. And we don't have any choice but to use a paper of local circulation, so that's $899 right out the gate, okay? And then $435 to file the petition, and then for every certified order that we need, once we get the petition approved, it's $40 per certified court order. So that's just the opening cost, okay, about $1,500. So then once we get through the probate and we get all the creditors paid and the inventory has been filed with the court of all the assets of the estate, we then move forward to distribute the estate, and the attorney is paid 4% of the first $100,000 of gross value of assets, 3% of the next $100,000, and 2% of each $100,000 after that up to $1 million. So let's just say you have a house worth $400,000 in Stockton and perhaps a few accounts, and with a car and whatnot, you're at $500,000. The attorney would be paid $13,000 in fees, and the executor would also be paid $13,000 in fees. So that's the real cost of probate, and all of that can be avoided if you either title assets appropriately or name beneficiaries. But if it's a house, again, the only way to avoid probate is to create a revocable trust and retitle that house in the name of that trust. Okay, so these are just different options. First, we can do no planning, and it's going to go through court. We can do a regular will, what we call a testamentary will, where at least you tell the court who you want to serve on your behalf as executor, and you tell the court where you want your assets to go, but it still goes through court, okay? The next option is what we typically do as estate planners is we set up a revocable trust, okay? We're going to set up a revocable trust. We're going to transfer titles on real properties into that trust. If you own any businesses, either a sole proprietorship, LLCs, S Corps, C Corps, we're going to assign your underlying interests in those companies to the trust so that somebody has the ability when you're gone to wind up those businesses, collect any monies owed you, sell them if necessary, whatever they have to do, right? So We assign or transfer title on assets into that revocable trust, and the trust then specifies who the managers are after you. Normally, you set up yourself as the primary manager, which we call the trustee, and then you name people after you. I recommend at least you name at least a person and a backup person, right? Life doesn't always go the way we plan. So those successor trustees would step in to manage the assets and distribute them. So you're saying, well, that's all after death. That's right. But the beauty of a trust is it takes effect the day you sign it. A will has no effect till the day you die, okay? So a trust takes effect the day you sign it. What does that mean? I got a call about 2 years ago from a lady, and she said, my dad has been in a farming accident, and we need to pay bills for him. Can you help us? And I said, well, can he come meet with me, or do you need me to come meet with him? And she said, no. She said, my dad's in a coma. He sustained a head injury. And I said, I'm so sorry. I said, have you gone through his papers? Does he have powers of attorney? Do you have like a financial power of attorney somewhere that would allow someone to pay his bills? She goes, we can't find anything. And I said, to my knowledge, then your only option is to go to court and ask the judge to set up a conservatorship. Somebody has to be appointed. It's a very long, expensive process, and you're not going to get in very quick. So it's not as if you're going to get in next week. We're talking months down the road. An advocate has to be named for the person who's incapacitated. And I don't even do them, quite honestly, and most of my colleagues don't, because it's such a long, drawn-out process, and a judge doesn't like to take away somebody's rights to make their own decisions. Might be a little easier when somebody's in a coma. But they don't want to do that, understandably, right? Because sometimes people are in some stage of dementia or Alzheimer's, but they haven't completely lost that ability to make decisions. And a judge doesn't like to take away somebody's ability to make decisions. But that's the only option if somebody hasn't signed any documentation saying somebody can help pay my bills, okay? So with estate planning, though, the trust would be in place if you lost capacity. What does that mean? If you could no longer make decisions, and let's say your houses have been transferred to the trust and investment accounts have been transferred to the trust that are not retirement-based, then that person that you've named as a manager after you, if it becomes determined again that you can't manage things for yourself, or if you choose to resign, that person can step in, manage those assets, pay your bills, do whatever they need to do to make sure you're taken care of. We talk about somebody's customary standard of living. The trustee manages the person's assets for their benefit to maintain their customary standard of living. So again, do you need care? They're going to help coordinate a care home if you need that, in-home care, whatever it is. That's the financial component, okay? So a lot of people think if they sign an advance healthcare directive for medical, that also involves the care process. It involves the medical side, but not the financial. So many times, if you go to the hospital, they'll ask somebody, do you have power of attorney? They're actually in their mind thinking of the financial one oftentimes, because they want to know, does somebody have the ability to sign the hospital contract or a rehab home contract? And that's the person who has financial power of attorney, not medical power of attorney. So you actually want both in place, okay? And honestly, my personal opinion is that anybody over the age of 18 should have powers of attorney in place. Even if you don't want to involve an attorney, you can go online and download some forms to set up a financial power of attorney and a medical one. And even at age 18, it's important today. I had a lady call me and she said, my child is away at college and they won't give me any medical information because they're saying she's over the age of 18. And so your child has to have given you that authority if you're going to be able to talk to any doctors, right? My son was sick his freshman year at college, and I actually got a call from the doctor. It kind of shocked me, but it was because it was a week before his 18th birthday. And he said, I can't legally treat him unless you give me authority to treat him. I thought, oh, that means in a week you can treat him, and I'll have no knowledge of it. So it was kind of one of those aha moments as a parent. You just realize some of those things that you've assumed you could do, and Josh was ready to turn 18, and soon I would not be able to help him at all. So those are some things to consider, okay? If you lost capacity for any reason, you want those powers of attorney in place, But the trust, if you've set one up, would also be in place to allow your assets to be managed immediately for your benefit during your lifetime, okay? So in the trust, you also specify, again, the managers are what we call trustees. Then you get to name who the beneficiaries are, who benefits from your assets when you're gone. And you can name, obviously, children, charities, your church, other nonprofit organizations. You can name whoever you want because they really are your wishes, and those are what need to be memorialized in writing somewhere. With the, when you do those beneficiaries, I always encourage you to think about beyond what I call that first line of distribution. In other words, if everything goes exactly the way you hope it does, how will it get distributed, right? So you say, okay, if everything goes just like I want all my assets to go as follows. Then you say, but if things don't quite go the way I'm hoping, if I lose a child, if somebody else passes away, who do those same gifts go to, okay? Those are not easy things to think about, but having lost a sister during COVID, those are necessary things to think about, okay? And they really should be your choices because you want to, again, carry out your legacy in a way that mirrors what you want, okay? During life, how did you live and how did you gift? You want to be able to carry that on beyond your life, okay? So those are some of the important parts of a trust. You can specify gifts in a will, but again, it has to go through court in order to be carried out, okay? I've had several people call me when somebody's passed away, and they've been giving things away and taking care of business, and all of a sudden they find an account in the person's name with no beneficiaries, right? And I get a call and they say, June, I just talked to, let's say Charles Schwab, and Schwab is saying I need to bring them letters of testamentary in order to be able to access the account. And they said, what's that? And I said, well, they're telling you to go open a probate. And they're like, what? So then we have to look at what assets are there outside the trust, what assets are there that the person left. Again, if you have no property, so that's not an issue. If you have accounts and the total amount of those accounts, it just went up this year, by the way, if a total amount of those accounts are less than $184,500, we can actually use what we call a small estate affidavit procedure. This is true even if you have a trust, by the way. Most of your assets are titled in a trust, but you forgot about a couple of accounts. A money market, let's say, that you forgot about, and a checking account. Let's say the total amount between those two accounts is $75,000, and you're gone. You already have a trust. We can use what we call a small estate affidavit to access those accounts. If you had the trust, those accounts would then go into the trust, okay, to be administered and distributed like you asked. If you don't have a trust and it's just going to go to family, then the small estate affidavit said it has to go equally, basically, to your intestate heirs. So if you had no will, so let's say you had 3 surviving children, all 3 of them have to sign the affidavit, and then Charles Schwab would distribute that account equally to all 3 of those children. But it can only be signed if all assets that don't have beneficiaries on it or aren't titled in a trust, if all those assets don't exceed a total amount of $184,500, okay? So, but that is a nice procedure that's available to people. I've had clients who have passed away, who lived in a mobile home or something. That's not real property under California law. So you can transfer a mobile home outside of probate, which is good. And they had a few small accounts because they were living month to month on pension or Social Security. And we can access those accounts with a small estate affidavit, and the person can distribute those to the surviving children. Because again, if you don't specify, it's going to go equally to whoever the next line of heirs is. If you leave a surviving spouse, he or she gets part of those assets, and then the rest goes to the children. So those are just things to consider when you're looking at what do you own and where would you want it to go if something happened to you, okay? So something that people don't always think about, do you have social media accounts? Do you have a Facebook account? Do you have email? Do you have online access to accounts, right? I guess there's Twitter. What are the ones my kids talk about? Instagram, Snapchat. Those are called digital assets, okay? Anything that requires an online login. If you have anything like that, email, Facebook, those cannot be shut down unless you've put in writing that somebody has the authority to do that. I talked to an attorney in LA about 3 or 4 years ago, and this is all he deals with is digital assets. I didn't know it was that big of a deal. But he told me that as of, again, about 3 or 4 years ago, there were 30 million users on Facebook who were deceased, and nobody had the ability to shut down their accounts. I thought, that's why I keep getting birthday notices for these individuals who are good friends of mine who have passed away. And I've always thought that's kind of insensitive to their family. You know, it's like, oh, so-and-so's birthday today, wish them happy birthday. So if you want somebody to have that ability to maybe shut down those accounts or whatever else, you need to give somebody that ability in writing to do so. So we now add, at least I do, I add language in the appropriate documents so that, again, if during your lifetime, I have a client who's lost capacity, and her account keeps getting hacked, her Facebook account. And I get friend requests from her account every few months. And honestly, that should be shut down because you don't want the person who's hacking the accounts to create havoc for those to whom, if somebody actually receives that friendship request, right? So if somebody's lost capacity, there's documents in place where the person who's managing things for them can actually shut down those accounts. So just be aware that there's all those components. I had a young man die during COVID who was in his early 30s. He drank himself to death, unfortunately. And when he passed away, his mom realized that all of his accounts, financial accounts, everything statement-wise came to him in email. He did not have a single piece of paper. So he had gone completely paperless. And she said, how in the world do I access this? You know, he didn't set up an estate plan. He was in his 30s. He's not expecting to pass away. And so again, they were trying to figure out how to access those. They weren't even sure where his accounts were. Because again, people aren't really talking about that at age 30, right, or 35. I got a call a few weeks back even from a gentleman whose son who had COVID. From best what they can determine, he was weakened by the COVID, so he was walking through his house and he fell and hit his head and died. And his son's in his early 30s. He's a successful individual already, so he owned a home and cars and whatnot. And so now they're looking at a full probate for a child. Again, the last thing you want to deal with if you're in the middle of grief is something like probate, quite honestly. So what we look at is what options do you have to avoid that process? How do we stay out of court, the expense of court, which in my mind is really unnecessary, unless you're actually seeking for a judge to be overseeing everything. If you really feel like you have such a complicated scenario, perhaps, and you don't trust anybody to make wise decisions, so you want it to go through court, then probate actually could be a good place for your assets to go, all right? I just haven't met that person yet who says, I would prefer it to go through court. And I don't even say that facetiously because I've actually heard of some who opted to go through court for that very reason. Very significant estates, very complicated, children who didn't get along, so they actually wanted a judge to oversee it. I've heard of such stories. I just don't have those clients. So you have to decide how you want your assets to go, again, when you're gone. But like we talked about initially, you really need to decide who can help you during life if you want or need it, okay? And sometimes during life, it's not even an issue that you've lost capacity. I've had clients who are, maybe they're facing like either cancer or some medical condition that has depleted their energy. And they're like, June, I just don't even have the energy to talk to my financial advisor or to my bank or whatever else. Can I have somebody go do that for me? I just don't. That's the least thing on my mind right now. Can somebody else do that for me? So again, if the documents are in place, somebody else can handle those things for you, okay, and go help with those things. So there's just a variety of things, and I could give you a plethora of examples, but the idea is that the estate plan, from my perspective, deals with issues during life and then when you're gone, okay? So we're just trying to simplify things. For me, it's really who do you trust, right? And that's one last thing I want to address. when you're making these decisions, as hopefully all of you will at some point make decisions, who do you name? Who is the person or persons that you're going to name, right? I had somebody tell me one time, I think I'm going to name my son, and we're going through the whole scenario. And something the person said triggered something in my mind, and I said, so tell me more about this son. And they said, well, he's declared bankruptcy twice, but I think he'll be fair with my assets. I said, okay. You're supposed to have a poker face in law. I don't always succeed. They taught us that as DAs in trial, always have a poker face. But the idea is that I said, well, if the person isn't responsible with their own assets and you have a fair amount of assets, why would you assume that they're going to be responsible with yours? And the person kind of sat there and said, oh, I hadn't really thought of it that way. And I'm not making fun of somebody, but the point is, I'm there to try to, or any estate planner for that matter, we're trying to help you think through those options because you want to make an informed choice, okay? And you want to name people, whether it's medical, whether it's financial, whether it's dealing with your trust, whatever, you want to name people that you truly trust. I mean, they have to be ethical individuals. In my mind, they should be fiscally or financially responsible, okay? They should have some knowledge of how to deal with things financially. People often say, like, I'll have a couple sitting there. My one child is so good with finances, they'll do a great job. This other one, not so much, that type of thing. Or this one child would be fantastic to deal with medical issues. They're very compassionate. They will carry out my wishes, right? So you have to know the people you're talking about. It doesn't have to be family. It usually is that you name, right? But you might have good friends. You might have a sibling or a cousin that you implicitly trust. So you have to think through who the people are in your realm of, everyday life. Who do you trust? And then you're going to name, hopefully, at least one, if not multiple people, who would step in again if you want or need that assistance, okay? So that's just kind of a quick overview. We're actually already out of time, but I wanted to give you some options and some things to at least think about because, like I said, I think honestly estate planning is incredibly important. It allows us as believers to steward our assets and to name people who hopefully will steward them the same way we want. I had one client or clients who actually had they had a large estate, and they decided they wanted their children to carry on their legacy of supporting missions organizations and Christian nonprofit organizations. So they actually put in the trust directly that they wanted each child to tithe 30% of what they were inheriting to a nonprofit Christian organization that was directly like sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like they had this very explicit statement. The kids don't have to, mind you, but it lets the kids know what the parents' wishes were, that's mom and dad's heart, is we want you to actually be generous with what God has gifted to us. So it's really just a neat way of doing that as believers to set up things where, again, you're naming people that you trust to make decisions, to coordinate for you, to pay bills, whatever you need. And again, it's that way you're the one determining who does that. If you don't, anybody can come into court basically and petition the judge to manage your estate for you. And it may not be the person you would have chosen. So my thought is you make those choices yourself at a minimum. I encourage you to do the powers of attorney, again, medical and financial. But I still think everybody should do more than that. But again, that's just kind of my initial thoughts on estate planning. Any questions?
One or two quick questions, and then if you have any other questions, feel free to talk with June in the foyer afterwards.
June, just a little bit more on the in writing for like Facebook, or you have an Amazon account. You said it needs to be in writing. Can you just write a note and stick it in with your trust, or I need to give it to the attorney?
It's usually actually general language regarding digital assets is usually included in the power of attorney and in the will. It actually gives the person the ability to manage those assets. But there's a lot of, I don't know if they're still going on. There were a lot of lawsuits as of a couple years ago against Google, Facebook, Yahoo, all these different ones because they were refusing people access to those accounts. And honestly, I don't even know what the outcome of what some of those were. So now we're including that language directly in your estate planning documents. We don't name accounts. We talk generally about digital assets.
Okay, so I should look in my trust and see if it has that wording
It would
in
be in
it?
your power of attorney, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, it would be. Okay, thank you.
sure.
Anyone else?
Okay.
All right, well, thank you, June, for sharing with us. And thank you all for coming out. I hope that this was informative. I saw a lot of you taking notes, but if you missed anything, this was being recorded, so we'll have it online on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and catch anything that was said that you might have missed. I'd like to just close us in prayer, and then by way of reminder, our guests are in the foyer if you have any additional questions or just want to exchange contact information with them. Lord, thank you for just your goodness, your grace, your love. Thank you for the hope of heaven with you forever. Thank you that this life is not the end of the story. Thank you that we have the confidence of spending forever with you if we have our trust in you. And Lord, thank you for the wisdom that was shared. Help us to be good stewards of the resources that you've entrusted us with and to just plan well, to be wise, and to be good stewards and have your kingdom in mind as we think of these decisions that we have to make. Thank you for being with us every step of the way and just for being a loving Heavenly Father. In Jesus' name, amen.